Welcome back, littles. Tonight we are going to read chapter 11, The Crows of Crowwood. If you remember in chapter 10, the witch returned, and then suddenly Maggie and Ivy's dads didn't recognize them anymore. So we're going to read on now for chapter 11, The Crows of Crowwood. Maggie and Ivy sniffled and said nothing as Amethyst cast a spell over the house to unshatter the windows and fix the roof. Her magic was still weak, however, and although the glass was back in the window frames, it was still cracked and you could hear the wind whistling through the gaps. Later, after she had produced a normal sort of meal for the girls, fish fingers and baked beans, not a crushed beetle in sight, Amethyst used the last of her strength to magic up 2 pairs of dark purple pajamas with matching slippers. "I'll see what I can do about beds tomorrow, girls," she said, stumbling to the armchair in the living room and collapsing into a heap. "We can sleep on the sofas tonight," Ivy said, trying to sound cheerful. "It'll be like a sleepover." "What happened, Amethyst? Why don't our dads remember who we are?" Maggie asked softly, her head bowed. "It's Emerald, Maggie," Amethyst insisted, her face muffled by several sofa cushions. "This is exactly what she did last time. She cast a spell causing every parent or guardian to forget their own children. It's much easier to steal a child if no one will notice they're missing." "All the parents have forgotten their children? Not just ours?" Ivy asked. "Unless she was planning to target you two and only you two," Amethyst said, looking worried. "But that's never really been Emerald's style. She's an all-or-nothing type of person. Go big or go home." Amethyst yawned through her words and curled her legs up towards her, ready to settle in for the night. "But that means every child in Crowwood Peak will be without a home tonight," Ivy said, horrified. Maggie gasped, thinking of how awful she had felt when her father had forgotten who she was, and knowing every child would be feeling the same right now. "Parents all over the place will be kicking out these strange children they found in their homes," she whispered. Her lips began to wobble again. Suddenly, Amethyst's eyes were wide, the thought of lost and frightened children forcing her up and out of her cozy armchair and over to the window. "Oh, goodness, girls, you're right. Look!" She pulled the curtain aside and beckoned them to the window. They peered between the cracks in the glass, and the sight they saw was a sorry one indeed. The children of Crowwood Peak were wandering aimlessly along the road in their pajamas, slippers, and fluffy dressing gowns, looking miserable and lost. 2 girls sat consoling each other on the curb, and others angrily kicked fence posts or threw stones at their parents' parked cars. "We can't leave them out there, Amethyst. We're the only ones who can explain to them what's going on," Ivy pleaded. "Maybe they can help us come up with a plan to defeat Emerald. If the adults can't help, I bet the kids will," Maggie said. "You're right. Come on." Amethyst ran to the front door and swung it open wide. She rubbed her hands together, and although the most she could create was a small purple glow, she only needed a little bit of magic for her next trick. She placed her hands round her throat and drew in a deep breath. "Children of Crowwood Peak!" Her voice came out of her mouth as if it was coming out of a megaphone. It was loud and booming and seemed to travel for miles. All the children turned their heads towards Hokum House, paying close attention. "Do not be alarmed. The Crowwood Witch has entranced your parents into forgetting you, but this spell will not last forever. I am Amethyst, and I am the Crowwood Witch's sister. I banished her once before, and I can do it again. Come to Hokum House and stay the night. I promise that you will be safe here." Amethyst pulled her hands away from her throat, but no one moved a muscle. There was an eerie silence that filled the street as dead leaves rustled past in the wind and the sky rumbled over the mountains in the distance. "They don't trust me," Amethyst said, her voice hoarse and dry. "Not only am I a stranger, but I'm a witch too. Why would they come?" "Come on, Ivy. These are our school friends. They'll believe us." Maggie raced out of the house in her purple pajamas and her slippers and zoomed towards the child closest to the house. Ivy recognized the girl from quite a few years below them at school. She was about 5 years old. Maggie took her hands and said something that made the girl's bottom lip begin to wobble violently. Then together they began to walk back towards the house. "This is Darla," Maggie said to Ivy and Amethyst, with a huge grin on her face. Darla waved her hello with one hand while holding onto a stuffed unicorn by its golden horn with the other. Amethyst stepped aside, and Darla ran into the house as fast as her little feet would carry her. "What on earth did you say to her, Maggie?" Amethyst asked. "Yeah, she looked pretty upset," Ivy said, peering in through the doorway to watch Darla duck behind the sofa. "The truth. I told her that you only do good magic, that you're going to defeat the Crowwood Witch, and if Darla didn't want her heart eaten, then she'd better get inside the house as quickly as possible," Maggie stated. "Maggie?" Ivy gasped. "Am I wrong?" Maggie asked. Ivy and Amethyst couldn't answer because they both knew that no, Maggie was not wrong. In fact, she was so right that the three of them ran from the house and began to spread the message to the children that the safest place for them was inside Hokum House. They pointed up the mountain where the green smoke spiraled and flashes of light came from the summit like bolts of lightning. They explained that the Crowwood Witch was called Emerald, and she had spent the last 300 years as a cat. They told the children that she had returned, although Maggie and Ivy decided to omit the fact that it was they who accidentally helped her return. And now she was back, and she was planning to eat the heart of one last child so that she could stay youthful for all of time and wreak havoc on Earth for everyone. The children of Crowwood Peak started to run as fast as they could. There was a sudden rush to get inside as quickly as possible. The children crammed themselves through the doorway, squeezing past one another and shouting. Amethyst waved her hand, and the doorway grew wider, allowing the children inside with ease. Once the last few stragglers had made their way into the house, Amethyst returned the doorway to its original size and closed the door behind her. Amethyst, Maggie, and Ivy had expected chaos, but the children were too sad and frightened for that. Instead, they had mostly found somewhere to sit, some of the younger children finding spaces to lie down or resting their heads against the older children's shoulders, and an eerie hush fell over them all. Judging by the frightened looks they were throwing at Amethyst, they were still also a little scared of her. Not surprisingly, considered they'd never encountered a real witch before, and if Amethyst was anything like the witches in some of the stories they'd been told, she might turn them into toads if they were too loud or upset her. So they simply sat and watched each other, looking for signs of hope and comfort. It was almost as if they were waiting to be told what to do next. Maggie usually wished she could have a day when she didn't have a bedtime or could eat dessert whenever she liked and not just after dinner. Now that her father had forgotten who she was, she missed the sound of him telling her it was time to turn out the light and go to sleep, or that she could have another bowl of ice cream because 2 was already too many. She looked around and realized everyone probably felt the same. "Why has the witch returned?" Edie, Ivy's science partner, asked. Maggie and Ivy shared a look laden with guilt. "That would be our fault. We broke the dozen circle," Ivy explained. "The dozen circle? Like in the legend?" asked Isaac, who was sitting at the end of the sofa by Darla, her head in the unicorn's horn poking above the big cushion she sat behind. "It's real?" "No, the legend isn't real," scoffed Jemima, and her friends Jennifer and Jamie nodded furiously in agreement. "It's just a scary story to make kids behave." "I can assure you it is not," Amethyst spoke up abruptly, and her voice was so firm that almost everyone jumped out of their skin. "The Crowwood Witch is very real. 12 children were taken by her hundreds of years ago, and now my sister, who has inherited the curse, is on the hunt for a final child to make it 13. Everyone shifted uncomfortably, and someone began to weep softly. "So much for not scaring people," Maggie muttered. "But can you stop her? You can, can't you? You're a witch too," Isaac piped up, clutching a jar of something that looked like it was bubbling. "No, not only is Amethyst a witch, Isaac, she's the Crowwood Witch. But she's a good witch, and if anyone knows how to defeat Emerald, it's Amethyst." "She can help us," Maggie puffed out her chest, beckoning Amethyst forward to speak. I want to help. I really do. But my magic, it's faded, and I don't know why. Amethyst looked down at her hands and rubbed them together, trying to find the magic beneath her fingertips. It's not as strong as it was just a few days ago. I think my sister returning and getting stronger has made me weaker somehow. You'll get stronger, Amethyst. I know you will, Maggie said encouragingly. I think we need some rest, Ivy said. I think you all need to be locked up for spouting this nonsense, Jemima sneered. I don't know about you lot, but I'm going home. My parents haven't forgotten me. They both, had forgotten a moment. At exactly the same time. That's it, you'll see. She tightened the belt on her plush baby blue dressing gown and stomped towards the front door. Jemima, you can't go outside. It's too dangerous, Ivy pleaded. If you think I'm about to listen to someone with hair as hideous as yours, you've got another thing coming. Purple really isn't your color, Ivy, Jemima snapped. Ivy waited for everyone to laugh at her, but no one did. Even Jennifer and Jamie, both sunken in the corner of their room. They didn't utter a slightest little snicker at Jemima's cruel comment. Witches, really? Jemima barked at a parting shot. Then she stepped out of the house and walked down the long path of her own. She opened the front garden gate, still muttering to herself. She turned to take one last look through the doorway in the hope that someone would be coming with her, but everyone else remained inside the warmth and safety of Hokum House. The wind was really blowing now, so much so that Jemima pulled her dressing gown round her neck and held it tightly. Suddenly there was a flapping of wings and a caw, caw, as a crow landed on the white fence at the front of the house, very close to Jemima. Oh no, Amethyst whispered. What is it? Ivy stuck her head out the door to get a better look. But Amethyst put her arm up and pushed her back. The crow looked from the faces huddled in the open doorway to Jemima, who had clocked the bird and taken a step backwards. Her face curled up in disgust at it. What's going on, Amethyst? Maggie asked. Ever wonder why this place is called Crowwood Peak? Amethyst kept her voice low so as not to scare Jemima or the other children, who were crowding closer and closer to them in the hallway. She raised her voice over the howling wind, which was whipping the last few wee leaves off on the trees into a rustling frenzy. Jemima, you need to get inside right now. Shoo! Jemima hissed, but the bird simply hopped closer. I said shoo, you stupid bird! Caw! The bird replied in a menacing tone that made the hairs on Maggie and Ivy's necks stand on end. So this place is called Crowwood because there are a lot of crows? So what? Isaac asked, eavesdropping. I've always quite liked them. That's not entirely the whole story, Amethyst turned back to Jemima, not letting the crow out of her sight. They belong to her. She put them here to do her bidding and spy on everyone in the area. And that's exactly what they've been doing for years. Hundreds of little flying minions who report back to the Crowwood Witch. No one can even so much as whisper near a crow without Emerald knowing about it. And this crow in particular is also one of hers, Ivy asked. It looks just like normal. Just then the bird twisted its head, and in the light of the street lamps they could clearly see that its eyes glow green. Never mind. It's definitely one of hers. What do we do? She whispered. Why is it looking at me like that? Jemima's voice was beginning to tremble as the bird hopped closer and closer, cocking its head to the side and eyeing her with its beady glare. Get away from me, you filthy thing! She batted her hands at it, but it stayed exactly where it was and was joined by a second crow. It landed on the other side of Jemima and fixed her with the same look in its eyes. Jemima, you need to get inside now. No, this is just some elaborate hoax, and I won't fall for it. Jemima, I promise you that no one is playing a trick on you. No one except the witch, Maggie scoffed. What? Jemima stuttered, unable to take her eyes off the crows. They're only crows, just harmless birds? Suddenly Jemima was surrounded by more crows than they could even count. They settled along the fence, on the pavement around her feet, on the grass in Amethyst's front yard, and more importantly, all along the long path between them and Jemima. I'm going home now, Jemima said with a firm nod, but her voice was wobbly. She took a step away from the gate, but a crow nipped at her bare ankle, and the others called loudly. Stop that! Jemima swatted at the air around her knees, not daring to take an actual swipe at the bird, for fear of accidentally touching one of the creatures. She tried to take another step, but this time a crow nipped her so hard it broke the skin and drew blood. Amethyst, help her, Maggie pleaded. My magic isn't strong enough. Whatever spell has a hold on these crows is far superior to anything I can conjure up. You have to try, Amethyst. I know that she's a bit of a pain, but she's still someone's daughter, even if they've forgotten who she is, Ivy begged. This murder of crows could actually murder Jemima. Amy nodded, but the dark circles under her eyes seemed to grow even darker at the mere thought of having to produce such powerful magic. She rubbed her hands together, shot a silent little prayer up to the moon, and tried to stir her magic up from within. Magic is a very personal thing, she explained. Some people have to think the happiest thoughts they can in order to summon their most powerful magic. Some let their minds go blank and need perfect silence, and some, like the Crowwood Witch, need to eat the hearts of pure and innocent children to perform their darkest spells. She paused and looked a bit bashful. I myself need something a little different to conjure up my most powerful magic for the bigger and more complicated spells. Promise me that you won't laugh. Maggie and Ivy crossed their hearts, and the other children did the same. None of them quite knew what to expect, but they certainly did not expect Amethyst to start singing. I wish I may, I wish I might, but not on stars I see tonight. Instead, I'll wish up to the moon and hope she hears my hopeful tune. Maggie and Ivy exchanged looks with raised eyebrows. Singing? Maggie whispered behind Amethyst's back, to which Ivy shrugged. Both suddenly began to doubt the person they'd put their faith in. Shh! Amethyst hushed them with her eyes still closed. Her hands were beginning to glow, still not very bright, but much brighter than before. Fiddly-dee, fiddly-doo, my heart is sweet, my heart is true. It's really a rather silly song, isn't it? Ivy muttered. This is precisely why that it works so well. Now shush! Amethyst hissed out of the corner of her mouth as she continued her song. Fiddly-doo, fiddly-dee, may the moon shine just for me. Amethyst shot her hand out in front of her towards Jemima. Her purple magic glittered through the air and created a shimmering bubble round the girl, who gasped loudly. Her eyes were wide in awe for a moment, but she quickly shook her head and her face returned to its usual scowl. The crows cawed loudly and flapped their wings, hopping from foot to foot. One of them flew with all its might towards Jemima. Maggie and Ivy braced themselves for the moment it flew into Jemima's head, waiting for a shriek and a tangle of wings and claws and hair. Instead, there was a comical boing noise as the bird bounced off the bubble around Jemima and was thrown over a meter into the air before it flapped its wings and flew away. You're doing it, Amethyst, Ivy cheered. Yes, but I need her to come back to us. My magic won't hold for long. Amethyst's voice was strained, her hands beginning to shake. Jemima, come here. The crows can't get you in the bubble. You're safe, Ivy yelled down the pathway. I told you, Jemima said, flinching as another crow threw itself at the force field. I'm going home. She turned away from them, but paused before taking a step. Jemima, I can't protect you outside this house. We need to stay together, Amethyst called. But I want to go home. For the first time, Jemima's angry, icy exterior cracked, and everyone got a glimpse of a small child beneath. She was as scared as everyone else, as in need of her parents as the rest of them, so much so that she was willing to risk her safety to get back to them, even though she knew they might not even know who she was. I'm going to get her, Maggie said, and she stepped out of the doorway before anyone could stop her. Maggie, no! Ivy tried to grab the back of her pajamas, but Maggie was too quick. If I'm fast enough, the witch won't know. Maggie ran down the pathway, not caring how many crows she disturbed. She swung the gate open and reached into the force field, which happily let her arm through, to take hold of Jemima's wrist and drag her down the path towards the house. Jemima was reluctant at first, trying to snatch her arm away and digging in her heels against each paving stone. But then Maggie felt her fingers clamp round her, and her feet began to run in the same direction as the crows started to hurtle at frightening speed at the bubble. As the crows flapped their wings, the green, glitter of Emerald's magic poured off their feathers. It smelled like damp grass and burning wood fires. These crows were certainly Emerald's minions. Maggie's heart began to pound in her chest. The crows were bouncing off Jemima's force field, but slamming directly into her. She could feel their beaks snapping at her dressing gown and their claws piercing the fabric. Amethyst, you have to make the force field bigger. Maggie's in danger, Ivy cried. I can't, Amethyst said between strained, panting breaths. If I try to make it better, it might collapse altogether, and then we lose them both. Ivy watched helplessly as the crows engulfed Maggie. Maggie could see Ivy and all the children in the house behind her beckoning her to come. And although Ivy's mouth was opening and closing, Maggie could only hear the sounds of the birds squawking in her ears. Suddenly, she could feel Jemima's hand tugging on hers, and then she felt their hands being slowly pulled apart. It was only then that Maggie realized her feet were no longer touching the ground. An involuntary scream rose out of the deepest place in her chest. The crows had dug their claws into her socks, her dressing gown, and her long purple hair, and were pulling her upward. Several of the frightened feathered things had swarmed around her, creating a tornado-like orb that was sucking her off the ground and into the sky. Jemima tried to hold on to Maggie for as long as she could, but when she felt her feet begin to lift off the ground too, she couldn't hold on any longer. She slipped down on the pathway with a thump and watched as the crows created a glittering green mass around Maggie. Amethyst kept her magic around Jemima, but as soon as the girl had cleared the doorway and was safely back inside, Amethyst let her magic spell break. The purple force field surrounding Jemima popped with the same satisfying noise that bubblegum makes when it bursts. Maggie! Ivy yelled up in the sky, but it was no use. Ivy could no longer see Maggie through the sheer number of crows that were cawing and flapping violently near her. They flew higher and further away, until the floating orb was only a glowing green dot against the night sky. I'm so sorry, Ivy. I'm so sorry, Amethyst whispered, and then she fainted. Right, that is the end of chapter 11. Oh, I'm nervous for Maggie. Come back tomorrow night and we'll read the next chapter together. Sweet dreams.